Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. We're going to start off today's show by discussing the United States suspending funding to the World Health Organization. Donald Trump has instructed his administration to suspend funding to the international global health body. He said the WHO has failed in its basic duty in response to the coronavirus and has therefore suspended that body's fees and dues at this point in time, at least the portion that the United States pays towards that global health body at this point in time. Global reactions have been, as expected, negative to this decision of Donald Trump, saying that this is certainly not the time to be defunding the WHO, especially right in the middle of the pandemic. That's not to say, of course, that there is not legitimate criticism of the WHO at this point in time about how it may have handled this coronavirus from day one, whether it should have enacted and told of the issue a lot earlier on than it did, possibly. Donald Trump says it's China-centric. Is that true or not? Does that even matter right at this point in time? Certainly those things can be reviewed after the fact, can it not? Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Calvin Dark, who is a principal and co-founder of RC Communications. He's joining us now from Washington, D.C. Joining us from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is Mary Andes, who's a master's in global health and public policy from the University of Edinburgh. She's also worked in global health for the BBC and at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Mary and Calvin, good morning to you both, and thank you for joining us here in Scope. Mary, let me start with you. What do you make of Donald Trump's decision?
Really irresponsible to begin with. I mean, like you said, surely there are problems with WHO that he can work on, but now is not the time. He even said that this could take 60 to 90 days, probably longer, and real lives will be lost during that time. I mean, he's trying to use the WHO, frankly, as a scapegoat for Trump's own mistakes, and it doesn't check out. If you look at how they treated it so far, like I said, I agree, there were mistakes made, but it just, in every way, they've done things that it has neglected to, and to cut the funding now is just completely horrible, completely irresponsible, both for the U.S. and the world.
Calvin, do you also think that Donald Trump is looking for a scapegoat? That's certainly an argument that many people are using at this time.
Yes, I think he's looking for somewhere to shift the blame. And like many people have said, there is legitimate criticisms that can be made, although stopping the funding now in the middle of the pandemic is probably not the smartest, regardless of where the blame lies. But one of the things that I just want to remind everybody about is one thing about Donald Trump is what he does is unorthodox, but it's not surprising. From the very beginning of his campaign, he's railed against international bodies, world cooperation, for one reason, is he has made a claim that for administrations, not just the past one, but administrations before that, that the world is taking the U.S.'s money and using it outside of the U.S.'s interest. Now, of course, a lot of that is completely untrue and completely mischaracterized, but this fits exactly in line. And this is why he did this. Will this have a practical effect other than the confidence in the WHO in the next few days and weeks? Probably not. But this does allow the people that support him to be reminded that he said he was going to put America first.
Okay, so do you think this is genuinely putting America first? Because how does America benefit if the WHO loses funding, then loses, by default, really, its ability to be able to function in many places around the world, because the U.S. is, whether we like it or not, a major contributor to the WHO, as in other international bodies of the like as well. That sounds like it's almost like the American president is hitting himself over the head with a hammer.
The U.S. undoubtedly is a huge funder to WHO, and that money will be missed. The deaths might not come soon, in a few weeks, few months, but the WHO does so many things that ultimately keep the U.S. and the world safe, and to try and separate the two just doesn't work out the way Trump wants it to. I mean, there's a continuing Ebola epidemic in the Congo right now, and the WHO is part of that line to stop that from coming to the United States, to protect the rest of the world. And you're right that it is on Trump's brand to something that helps people internationally, but ultimately this hurts America as well as everyone else.
So then what happens next, do you think? This is a suspension at this point in time, as we know. The administration has said that it will now be reviewing the WHO and its activities at this point. Will the U.S., as it has with other international organizations, we can talk about UNESCO, for example, will it make the decision to walk away? That's quite drastic, is it not?
Yes, to completely walk away is drastic, and In typical Donald Trump fashion, you notice there's always the show and the move, but it's not always followed up. Because for him, if it is a political move, he gets his political points with making the announcement. And because in this area where, yes, there's always politics involved, no matter what the issue, but with world health, and particularly the people on Donald Trump's health task force, they understand more than I do the great impact that the WHO has. So I think when it comes down to it, we won't do exactly as Donald Trump said we would do, but I do think that it's going to decrease the confidence that the U.S. citizens have in the WHO. But in the end, I don't think he'll go through with it, but he will continue to say that he did so that he then presents the image of letting the world not take advantage of the U.S. anymore. And I just want to add one other thing, too, is that he missed a really big opportunity when he did this. Instead of pulling the funding, he could have showed leadership and said, we have issues with X, Y, and Z. So we want to work with you to reform. And if those reforms are not heeded, then let's talk about funding. But he went straight to take away the money, which made great political points, but doesn't actually help the WHO, the world, or the United States.
Indeed. Well, Mary, I also feel like this is a lost opportunity, is it not? Because it's not like the U.S. is doing great at this point in time vis-a-vis its respective coronavirus pandemic and outbreak, right? I mean, we know that there's shortages of the most basic equipment for doctors and nurses across that country at this point in time. Wouldn't it have been smarter at this point in time to actually put a hand forward to the rest of the world and say, listen, we need you, you need us, let's work together?
I think that would have been absolutely great. I think, honestly, that Trump is incapable of doing something like that. I think that he is, as Calvin said, he's trying very hard to please his base and to separate the United States from any bigger organization. And I think this could have been a real chance. It could have been a real sign to the rest of the world that even while the U.S. is struggling within our borders to respond to COVID-19, we're not alone. We're not the only country dealing with this. It was a real opportunity to make some connections and kind of get some that I think Trump, needs to get internationally. But as usual, he kind of went for the easy fix. And I want to comment on what Calvin said before. He's completely right that Trump says one thing that often sounds very dramatic and does not always follow through. He has a bit of a buffer with Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci, who are both on the task force, in that a couple of times already, Trump will make some kind of dramatic statement, and then over the next few days, press releases will be sent out, and it's kind of softened because of these people. So I agree that this does not necessarily mean the United States will completely cut funding to the WHO, but I do think it's very worrying, and it just shows where Trump's head is.
Indeed. I wanted you, Mary, because it's interesting the way Donald Trump has acted vis-a-vis foreign policies when it comes to this entire pandemic, right? I mean, he's done things which defy logic vis-a-vis blocking masks being delivered to Canada, for example. I mean, Canada is a next-door neighbor, literally, and there are no issues, to the best of my knowledge, between the Canadians and the Americans at this point in time on an official basis. So why block those sort of masks? He's gone after the Europeans. He's done some really interesting, odd things throughout this time. Do you think that post-coronavirus, post-COVID-19, that the world will almost learn the lessons of how the United States has acted at this point in time and possibly take heed of that?
That's a very good question. I think that that's chance. I think that right now Trump feels backed into a corner, and all the kind of crazy actions we're seeing, like the ones you mentioned, fighting with Canada, the problems in our own country, I think a lot of those are basically just a PR stunt to get Trump out of this kind of mess he finds himself in. And I do not, that's a very horrible thing to call COVID-19, this whole situation. I think that he just doesn't know what to do. I think that he could reach out to leaders, as this is a great time to work with the rest of the world to fight this. But instead, we're basically fighting with ourselves within our own border. And it's wasting time. It's wasting resources that could be used within the United States and in other countries. And I don't know how the U.S. is going to come out of this. I don't know how we could come out looking like the leader in global health when we're making such mistakes within our borders and we're alienating everyone else outside our borders. I don't know what it will look like in the global health world post-COVID-19, and I'm not sure what the United States' role will be.
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways, do you think it was always Trump's plan to sort of have the U.S. take a step back from this global leadership role, be it in health or culture or otherwise, really? Because that seems to be the Trump playbook, doesn't it? And I mean, for many people around the world, that may make sense where the U.S. has had this leadership role, this policeman of the world. Maybe it is time for the U.S. to give that up?
No, I think it's a little bit more nuanced with Donald Trump. I think he wants to be seen as the world's leader. Every press conference, every statement he gives emphasizes that the U.S. has the most powerful economy. It used to be in the world. Now it's in the history of the world, which that's a whole nother math question we have to debate. You know, the most powerful military in the world, the smartest people. And there's nothing wrong with promoting America. I'm American, I promote it, and he's the president of the United States, so there's no surprise that he does that. So he doesn't want to not be the leader in the world. He wants to be seen as someone that finally steps in and says, we've been the leader, and we've been paying for everybody else not paying their fair share. That's why you don't have some of the things that you want, what he would say, speaking to his base here in the United States. So he does want to be seen as the world leader, the most important person, but he wants to be seen as cleaning up a system that, I will quote right before the election, only I can fix it. And I think that is the mentality behind what President Trump is doing.
Also, let's talk about consequences then, Mary, because as I spoke about earlier as well with you, the U.S. is a major contributor to the WHO, as are other countries, certainly. What kind of an effect will this have, do you think, especially on those countries which really genuinely rely on the WHO, developing countries, for example?
Have its results in developing countries. I mean, the sad thing about this is if our funding is truly cut to the WHO, the U.S. is not most at risk. And the countries that are rely heavily on the programs of WHO and rely on them for basic health systems in some countries. I mean, the WHO works on pandemics and international health emergencies, but they do everything more on a daily basis. They work on diarrhea and respiratory infections that kill children. They work on safe births and giving pre and postnatal care to mothers, medical and health education all over the world. They work against malaria, the Ebola Congo epidemic, as I mentioned. I mean, there are people that rely on that money directly. And like you said, the people who will suffer will be those people in developing countries who need that assistance, who need those malaria nets, who needs that health education, who needs that visit with their doctor when they're 3 months pregnant. These are the people who are going to miss out. And I don't think Trump, honestly, I don't think he considers them. I'm not even sure it's, like you said, it's wanting to look the best, wanting to please his base. And I don't know if he doesn't know, I'm sure he does, what these results will be, but I'm not sure he thinks it that far.
Because, there's also an argument to be made about soft power, right? One argument can be made that the U.S. has a humanitarian, a moral reason for helping out the rest of the world, really, even at this point in time, or just the WHO in general, or other such international organizations. But then there's also the argument to be made that it just looks good on the U.S. to be doing this, and it increases its soft power around the world in many people's minds. Do you think that's something that Donald Trump genuinely does not care about at this point? I mean, does he genuinely care about his country's image in that regard, not just in the regard where you have, a PR stunt? This is less so in your face.
Well, I think what you just described, the soft power influence that the U.S. has had and can continue to have, I do think Donald Trump's aware of it, but it doesn't make him look strong. It makes him look like we are continuing to pick up the slack from the rest of the world. But now, one thing I don't think he understands, and I really wish that a lot of people that supported him in this country did understand, is that when he was making this announcement, my first reaction was, regardless of what one may think with what the WHO did or didn't do, this is the exact opposite time to stop supporting them, not only for the coronavirus pandemic, but for some of the other things that we were just discussing. And I don't think that President Trump understands, or at least has not factored into his actions, the fact that when the world suffers from these things outside of the U.S.'s borders, it affects us in the United States. The same way with giving foreign aid to certain countries, military presence in other countries. He always simplifies it to say, well, what is the U.S. getting out of it? We're paying X number of days to protect them. He doesn't think about geopolitics, geostrategy, of how when there are less problems in certain areas of the world where we have U.S. interest, it helps the United States. So he doesn't even have to be altruistic. I just think he needs to understand that the WHO has done things that helped U.S. interests in ways that his base and a lot of Americans may not even understand.
All right, so then, Mary, I wanted to give you the final word, because it seems, and many people have made this argument, that if the U.S. were to walk away or even just suspend for now the funding as it's decided to, that other countries will have to fill in the vacuum, right? It's not like the rest of the world is just going to sit on their, sit down and just stay quiet. I mean, the WHO still has to function in some fashion, and it'll probably end up being the likes of China and others who will fill in that vacuum. And I would imagine that would make the United States, especially Donald Trump, quite unhappy. What are your thoughts about that?
I completely agree. I think it only makes sense that other will have to step up and, give more attention to the WHO. I think China will definitely fill that role. And I think that that's another thing that Trump is not considering or understanding. His criticism right now, and to a certain extent there's some fairness to the criticism. His criticism is that the WHO is China-centric. And, whether or not you believe that's true, certainly if China steps up and takes the role that previously the U.S. had been taking, surely then he must realize we'll have more control, we'll have more of a say. The U.S. will be out of the decision-making. And this makes no sense to me in any step. It seems like a bad move no matter how you look at it. And I just don't know how Trump can look at it over time and not understand that.
Very well. They're at that. But of course, we appreciate both Mary and Calvin for their time this morning and for putting that all into context for us.